Welcome to Divine Light, the Hebrew Bible verse by verse. In the prophetic tradition, a song is not entertainment. A song is the sound a soul makes when a hidden truth is finally visible. There are two kinds of songs in the Bible. A lament is sung in darkness, when the truth is that everything has been lost. But an anthem is only sung when the exile is over, when the gates that were sealed are open, when the city that was forbidden is, at last, yours again. Isaiah 26 is that anthem. Here is the thing most people never consider. For over 1,300 years, Jewish communities from Babylon to Toledo, from Cairo to Krakow, incorporated Isaiah 26 into their liturgical cycle. They sang it in synagogues built on every continent except the one it describes. They prayed eastward toward a city they had not entered in living memory. They sang the anthem of a gate that had not yet opened. This is not metaphor. This is documented liturgical history. Entire generations lived and died with this song on their lips, and never saw its subject. And the silence they were singing into had a start date. In 615 AD, Jewish autonomy briefly flickered back to life in Jerusalem, a fragile arrangement under Persian rule that lasted barely 13 years. The gates opened, and then, in 628 AD, the Byzantines returned. The gates slammed shut. The silence that followed was not forgetting. It was muscle memory. The trained reflex of a people who had learned to hold a song in their chest without releasing it, across catastrophe after catastrophe, century after century, until the moment it could finally be sung. 1,352 years, from 628 AD to 1967, is longer than the entire history of the United States, multiplied by 6. It is longer than the age of the oldest universities in Europe. It is a silence so vast that most civilizations would have concluded the promise was dead. But on June 7, 1967, farmers, teachers, engineers, survivors, the children of every expulsion and every deportation and every ghetto, walked through the Lion's Gate. A brigade commander pressed his face to the wall and began to weep. Not because he had won a military victory, because a song he had sung every year of his life had just found its subject. And the anthem that had been sung without a subject for 13 centuries finally had walls to echo off of, and Isaiah heard the anthem before history reached it. Let's walk through it, verse by verse. Verse 1.
On that day, this song shall be sung in the land of Judah. We have a strong city. He sets up salvation as walls and ramparts.
Isaiah places the song before the stone. The anthem precedes the architecture. And where it is sung matters. Not in the land of Israel, not in the land of Jerusalem, in the land of Judah. This is not geography, this is theology. The name Judah, Yehudah, comes from the Hebrew root Yod Dalet He. Two meanings, inseparable: to thank, to acknowledge. When Leah gave birth to her fourth son, she said, "This time I will praise Odeh, the Lord." And she named him Yehudah, the thanked one, the acknowledged one. In Hebrew, this is hoda'ah, acknowledgement that survives hiddenness, the ability to recognize truth even when the truth appears absent, to thank before the walls are visible, to face a city you cannot enter and say, "You are still the Tzur Olamim, even now, even here." Isaiah is saying this song can only be heard in a place and by a people that has mastered Hoda'ah. That people is Yehudah, And the land of Judah is not a postal address. It is a spiritual condition. In prophetic grammar, this matters. A song is only sung when a hidden truth finally becomes visible. And the Hebrew layer here repays attention. The word is Yeshua, salvation. But in Hebrew, Yeshua is not an abstract spiritual state. It is a force, active, load-bearing, structural. Isaiah says God will appoint salvation as walls. The walls of this city are not stone. They are a divine appointment. God does not build walls and then call them salvation. He establishes the Yeshua, and the Yeshua becomes the wall. The inner formation produces the outer form, not the other way around. What if the security you have been building inside yourself is the very thing that eventually manifests outside? Here is what that looked like in history. Israel entered June 1967 diplomatically isolated. Nasser had closed the Straits of Tiran. Egypt, Jordan and Syria had mobilized along every border. The international community, including the United States, declined to intervene. By every conventional military calculation, the outcome was catastrophically uncertain. The walls that held in June 1967 were not the Green Line. For 1900 years, the Jewish people had carried the inner framework of a city inside them. Every Shabbat candle lit, facing east, every whispered prayer toward Jerusalem, every declaration at the Passover table, next year in Jerusalem. Stone by invisible stone, they had built a city that no army could burn, because it was not made of stone. The paratroopers who entered Jerusalem in 1967 carried a city inside them before a single stone of it was under their feet. And on June 7th, the Yeshua that had been accumulating for 1,352 years finally became visible as walls. Verse 2.
Open the gates, that the righteous nation that keeps faith may enter.
The gate is not opened for the conqueror. It is opened for the Shomer Emunim. Shomer Emunim. Hold that phrase. Shomer does not merely mean one who keeps. It means one who watches, who guards, who stands at a post. It carries the discipline and alertness of a night watchman, someone who does not sleep on the job even when nothing is happening, especially when nothing is happening. Emunim is faithfulness, the kind you do not surrender because the cost of surrender is too permanent. What does it mean to keep faith with a city you cannot enter? It means you do not transfer your heart's allegiance to any other city. Empires offered Jews citizenship, comfort, assimilation, belonging, and some accepted. But the ones who kept faith kept an address that no empire had ever formally recognized. They maintained the zikrisha, the remembrance, through every century of the long night. They remained at their post. There is a question worth sitting with. Why was this not fulfilled in 615 A.D.? The gates opened then too. In 615 A.D., the Persian Empire under Khosrow II swept through Byzantine Palestine. Jewish autonomy in Jerusalem was briefly restored. Nehemiah ben Hushil was appointed governor. The Temple Mount came under Jewish administration. For 13 years it felt, like the circuit had closed. But the nation that entered in 615 A.D. did not enter as Shomer Emunim. It entered through the military convenience of a foreign empire, an empire that by 628 A.D. had shifted its political calculations. And when the empire shifted, the arrangement evaporated. The gates closed harder than before. What failed in 615 A.D. was not the faith of the Jewish people. It was the mechanism. An empire's whim is not Yeshua as architecture. A foreign army's goodwill is not walls. The nation that enters in verse 2 must have watched the faith on its own terms, not borrowed it from a Persian king. June 7, 1967, was not a political gift from a superpower. It was the arrival of a people who had not released their watch for 1,352 years. Verses 3 and 4.
The creature that relied, you shall guard. Peace, peace, for they trusted in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord God is an everlasting rock.
The structure of this translation is doing something that smoother English renderings tend to flatten out. The verse opens not with a condition, but with a creature, not the one who keeps his mind steadfast, but the creature that relied, the Yetzer Samuch, the leaning thing. And the divine response is not a reward delivered after trust is proven. It is an immediate guarding. The trust and the guarding are simultaneous. And then the double word, shalom, shalom, not repetition, a formula, two separate layers of peace arriving together. The first shalom is the interior one, the war between what we know to be true in our deepest place and what our circumstances are screaming at us. Ended. The second shalom is the peace between the individual and the world. Every historical event, even the catastrophic ones, finally seen as a necessary note in the ultimate song. The exile was not interruption. It was composition. That is shalom, shalom, not the absence of difficulty, the presence of something beneath the difficulty that makes the difficulty legible. The double shalom is given only to the creature that relied, not the one that achieved, the one that leaned and kept leaning until the leaning became its nature. And what it leans on is named immediately, Tzur Olamim, the everlasting rock. The word shares its root with tzir, to form, to press, to shape. Not a static refuge, the active source of all formation, constantly reshaping the world around those who lean on him. From 1948 to 1967, the diplomatic guarantees had evaporated. International goodwill was gone. Senior commanders privately assessed 40,000 casualties. Every human-built support had been stripped away, until the only thing left was to lean on the formulator. That is the final exam of Yetzer Samuch. Not trust when circumstances are manageable. Trust when every circumstance is screaming that trust is irrational. June 7, 1967. The physical security of a unified Jerusalem and the internal clarity, the stunning knowing that something ancient had just resolved. Two layers of reality, both at rest. The exile had not merely ended. The soul had been rebuilt into something capable of holding shalom, shalom. Verse 5.
For he has humbled the inhabitants of the height, the lofty city. He lays it low to the ground, casts it to the dust.
Isaiah uses the word yashpila twice. He lays it low. He lays it low. This is not repetition for emphasis. It is two simultaneous collapses named in sequence, the external fortress first, then the interior pride, the gava, the inner skeleton of arrogance, does not outlive the physical vessel that housed it. Both go down together. June 5, 1967, 07:44 hours. The Egyptian Air Force was the pride of the Middle East. 1 minute later, history began to unmake them. The sky over Egypt is clear. On the ground at Bir Gifgafa and Cairo West, the aircraft are lined up in rows. Egyptian MiGs, the pride of Nasser's Air Force, the instrument that was supposed to give the Arab coalition control of the sky before the ground campaign began. At 07:45, Israeli jets appear on the horizon at extremely low altitude, below radar detection, approaching from an unanticipated direction. The attack lasts 170 minutes. When it is over, the Egyptian Air Force no longer exists as a fighting force. Then the Jordanian, then the Syrian. Over 400 aircraft destroyed, the vast majority on the ground, never airborne. Those who dwelt on high were laid low to the ground before 9 a.m. The first Yashpila, the lofty city, the entire military doctrine of those who believed they controlled the sky, cast to the dust in 170 minutes. Verse 6.
The foot tramples it, the feet of the poor, the steps of the needy.
Now, who walks through the ruins? 2 words. Ani, Evion. The poor, the needy. And do not let the translation flatten what those words carry in Hebrew prophetic literature. Ani, the poor one, is not merely an economic descriptor. It describes one who has been structurally stripped of worldly support, who has nothing left to lean on but the Tzur Olamim. Evion, the needy one, is the one who is entirely dependent, entirely without self-sufficiency, who walks with nothing but the ground beneath his feet and the rock beneath that. This is the theological inversion at the heart of the entire prophetic tradition. The mighty are never undone by the mightier. They are undone by those who have learned to walk without leaning on their own strength. Think about who actually fought the Six-Day War. Not a superpower army with generations of military tradition behind it. A citizen army. Reserve soldiers called up from their workplaces and their kitchen tables. Holocaust survivors. Yemenite Jews who had walked across the desert to reach Israel a decade earlier. Iraqi Jews, Moroccan Jews, Egyptian Jews, expelled from their homes, stripped of their property, the arc of their lives broken and resumed in a country that was itself fighting for survival. People who had, in the precise language of Isaiah, been structurally stripped of worldly support and learned to walk without leaning on their own strength. These were the Ani and Evion of verse 6, not by metaphor, literally. And it was these people, the ones the empires of the world had trodden upon for centuries, whose feet walked through the lion's gate, whose hands touched the wall, whose voices broke as they wept. The arrogance, the entire pattern of the idea that power belongs to the powerful, dissolved in the image of a weeping paratrooper pressing his face to ancient stone. The strong city of verse 1 was built by the poor in spirit. It was entered by the poor in body. And the lofty city that tried to keep them out is dust. Verse 7. The level path.
The path of the righteous is level. You make level the way of the righteous.
Mystically speaking, this verse describes an alignment between the internal orientation of a soul and the outer movement of history. In the long night of exile, the path of the righteous appears crooked, filled with obstacles, reversals, and a shroud of confusion that makes the next step invisible. The crusader comes, the pogrom comes, the decree of expulsion comes. From the outside, the road looks like chaos, but the verse reveals something the exile conceals. The path was never crooked. The path was being weighed. The Hebrew word here is tapeles, to weigh, to balance on a divine scale. Isaiah is not describing a road smoothed in advance. He is describing a road calculated in real time, every obstacle measured and positioned with a precision that only becomes visible from the other end. The external rulers moved across the surface of the path. The righteous moved through the interior of it. The path was level the entire time. Only those walking it from the inside could feel it. Verses 8 and 9.
Even in the path of your judgments, O Lord, we have waited for you. For your name and for your remembrance is the soul's desire. My soul yearns for you in the night. Even with my spirit within me, I seek you for the dawn.
There is a distinction buried in verse 8 that most readers pass over, and it carries 13 centuries of meaning inside it. Shimcha, Zikricha, your name, your remembrance. These are not synonyms. Shimcha, the name, is the essential presence, the full weight of divine reality, unmediated, present. Zikricha, remembrance, is what remains when the presence is hidden. The memory of light during the darkness, the trace that persists when the source cannot be directly accessed. The soul longs for both the presence and the memory of the presence. In exile, you cannot hold the full name. The exile itself is defined by that hiddenness, but you can hold the remembrance. And it is the remembrance, the accumulated memory of who God has been, passed from father to daughter to grandchild, that keeps you at the post through the long night. And then there is Lakash, whispered prayer. Lakash is not the public declaration, the Shema proclaimed before a congregation, the liturgy chanted in full voice, the formal recitation that fills a sanctuary. Lakash is barely audible. It is the prayer that is too intimate for full voice, the murmur in the dark, not addressed to the room, but directly and only to God. It is what a people pray when 13 centuries of silence begin to feel like abandonment. This is the interior soundtrack of the exile, in every language, in every century, in Aramaic in Babylon, and in Ladino in Spain, and in Yiddish in Galicia, and in French in Paris. Under every flag, behind every locked gate, in every generation that kept the watch without seeing the dawn. The Lakash, barely audible, never silent. My soul yearns for you in the night. Notice that the seeking is rooted in shachar, dawn. To seek with ashakareka is to seek with the hunger of someone who has been in the dark long enough to understand what light means. The seeking is oriented toward morning. The Lakash is not resignation. It is the prayer of someone who knows, with the certainty of every generation before them, that morning comes. Here is what 1948 was, and what it was not. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 was not the resolution of the night. It was the first light on the horizon, unmistakable, real, but not yet the full dawn. Jerusalem remained divided. The old city, the Western Wall, the Temple Mount, the ancient streets of Jewish presence remained under Jordanian control. For 19 years after the state existed, Jews were legally prohibited from their holiest site. The Lachash continued, the Ashachereka continued. 1948 said, morning is coming. 1967 said, it is here. Verse 10.
If favor is shown to the wicked, he does not learn righteousness. In the land of uprightness he deals corruptly, and does not see the majesty of the Lord.
To the wicked, favor is not a lesson. It tends to arrive as confirmation. When an arrogant power is shown mercy, when it is handed time, stability, undisturbed possession, it does not experience that mercy as a divine test. It experiences it as evidence of its own strength. The universe from inside that perception is self-explanatory. Power is the explanation for power. Prosperity is self-generating. The gifts of history are rewards for superior strategy. They see everything. They perceive nothing. What followed in Jerusalem is worth observing carefully. Between 1948 and 1967, the old city of Jerusalem, the Western Wall, the Temple Mount, the ancient Jewish quarter, was held by Jordan. During those 19 years, the favor was extended. The international community accepted the arrangement, the borders held, the status quo was maintained. Favor shown to those who held the land of uprightness. What did they do with it? 58 synagogues in the Jewish quarter were systematically destroyed. Jewish gravestones from the Mount of Olives, some 2,000 years old, were used as paving stones and latrine floors. Jews were legally prohibited from approaching the Western Wall. Not restricted, prohibited. The righteous nation of verse 2 was physically blocked from its soul's desire by barbed wire and snipers. This is what it looks like to deal corruptly in the land of uprightness. This is what it looks like to not see the majesty of the Lord, to hold the most theologically charged ground on earth and treat it as a military garrison. The favor lasted 19 years. The blindness it produced was total, and the majesty they refused to see was already forming its response. Verse 11.
Lord, your hand is lifted up, but they do not see it. Let them see your zeal for your people, and be ashamed. Let the fire for your adversaries consume them.
Hester panim, the hiding of the face. It is almost always misread. Hester panim is not punishment in the simple sense, not God withdrawing in anger, the way a parent leaves the room to signal displeasure. It is something more structural and more sobering. Hester panim is the natural result of a perception framework that has been, by sustained choices, disabled. The face is not hidden from the outside. The eye is closed from the inside. The wicked do not fail to see the hand because it is invisible. They fail to see it because they have trained themselves through decades of explaining everything by power and strategy to process divine reality as geopolitics. In the weeks before June 5, 1967, the hand was lifted in plain sight. Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran. The UN peacekeeping force withdrew overnight. A coalition of Arab armies mobilized on every border simultaneously. Soviet intelligence was feeding targeting data to the Arab coalition. The language of the Arab leadership was explicit about its intentions. Every indicator pointed toward a coordinated strike aimed at Israel's destruction. To the generals and the analysts and the statesmen watching from the outside, this looked like an overwhelming military convergence, an inevitable outcome of superior numbers and strategic positioning. The hand of God moving in history was invisible to them because they had no category for it. Their inner orientation had no socket for that signal. But the Shomer Emunim, who had been training their perception through centuries of Lakash, saw it differently. Not because they were more intelligent, because the discipline of whispering to something you believe is listening across centuries of apparent silence produces a quality of sight that decades of favor can never build. On June 5th, 07:45 hours, the hand that had been lifted struck. There is a dimension of verse 11 that most commentators tend to leave underdeveloped. The fire that consumed the lofty air forces on the runways was not merely a military event. It was a mercy. Proverbs 23:14. You shall strike him with a rod, and you will save his soul from the grave. A defeat that breaks the ego is a correction, not a destruction. The rod of history preventing a nation from falling into the permanent grave of its own spiritual hubris. The shame, the boshe that follows, is not a dead end. It is the beginning of an awakening. The hand was lifted for 19 years. They did not see it. When it struck, when 3,000 years of prophecy condensed into 170 minutes, they had no answer. Verse 12.
O Lord, you shall prepare peace for us, for you have indeed wrought all our works for us.
the grand admission. After 6 days, after the impossible, the nation stopped looking at its own hands. Not, we fought bravely and God helped. All our works, every battle, every labor, every prayer, retroactively understood as having been moved by something that was never limited to the human. This is the peace of humility, and the Hebrew word for ordaining is tishpot, from a root meaning to cook, to set a pot on the fire. The peace is not handed over, it is assembled through heat. God gathers every small deed, every lakash, every century of the exile, into a complete body of spiritual reality. The fire of history was not punitive, it was culinary, and the vessel that receives it must be made of humility, because a peace that depends on the volatile strength of man leaks. The peace cooked through the long night of history does not. Verse 13.
O Lord our God, other lords besides you have ruled over us, but your name alone we bring to remembrance.
Bealunu Adonim Azulecha. Other lords, Adonim, have owned us, have had dominion over us, have sat in our cities and issued decrees in our streets and written our names on their census rolls as subjects of their empires. Now Isaiah names them, not individually, but as a category. The succession of Adonim that held dominion over the Jewish people reads like the roll call of world history's most powerful civilizations. Babylon, Rome. The Crusaders who arrived with crosses and swords in the streets Isaiah was describing. The Ottoman Empire, which held the city for 4 centuries and is gone without a trace of its claim. Each arrived with total confidence in their own permanence. Each embedded itself into the landscape of the land with the conviction of someone who believes they are the last word on the subject. Each dissolved. Not one of them is here. And through every single one of those transitions, under every flag, in every language, in every century, one name was brought to remembrance. Not the name of any of them. The Bealunu could seize the city. It could not seize the mention. The name that was brought to remembrance, Zikricha, in every one of those empires, in every language those empires spoke, in every century those empires claimed, that name is still being spoken, in the same language it was first spoken, by the same people who first spoke it, in the same city. This verse is the exilic testimony. It does not say the empires were unimportant or that their dominion was not real. It says their dominion was temporary, by definition, structurally, as a function of what they were. Because the only name that is load-bearing across the full span of history is the one that the watchers of faith refused to set down. Verse 14.
They are dead, they will not live. They are shades, they will not arise. To that end you have visited them with destruction and wiped out all remembrance of them.
Dead will not live. Shades will not arise. 4 declarations. No qualifications. No possibility of reversal. Rephaim. The word carries enormous weight in Hebrew prophetic literature and enormous interest because the Rephaim appear across the ancient Near Eastern world as something between the dead and the undead, the shades, the ghosts of the formerly powerful. They have form but no substance, presence but no life force. They cast a shadow but have no sun of their own to cast it with. What the tradition identifies as the distinguishing factor between the two is worth observing carefully. When a righteous nation falls, it falls like a seed into the ground. The form dies, the life force does not. It is compressed, hidden, waiting, building pressure in the dark until the conditions above ground are ready to receive it. That is Israel across 13 centuries, seed, not corpse. But when an arrogant nation falls, one that built its height on oppression, that possessed what it had no covenant right to possess, the fall is different in kind. Because the spiritual root was never real. The Tsar, the celestial minister, the heavenly counterpart of the earthly nation, is not dormant. It is cut. When God visits them with destruction, he is not merely removing the physical structure. He is severing the connection between the earthly power and the heavenly source that animated it. Without that root, there is no resurrection. There is only Repha. What this looks like when applied to the specific empires that held Jerusalem is illuminating. The Byzantines did not merely lose a military campaign in 628 AD. Their theological claim to Jerusalem, the idea that the Church Empire was the inheritor of the covenant promise, no longer governs the city. It survives as memory rather than sovereignty. It casts no shadow over the stone. The Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem lasted from 1099 to 1291. For 192 years, crosses were planted in the streets Isaiah was describing. Today, the Crusader claim is not contested. It is simply absent, not defeated, dissolved. Repha. The Ottoman Empire held the city for 4 centuries. The claim evaporated with the empire. No ghost remains. They wrote their names in stone. They believed in their own permanence. Today they do not possess a single pebble. They are shades. They shall not rise. And the nation that never stopped bringing the name to remembrance, the nation that was seed, not corpse, stands in the city. The sight is clear, because only the seed had the root to survive the salt of the exile. Verse 15.
You have added to the nation, O Lord. You have added to the nation. You are glorified. You have extended all the borders of the land.
You have added, you have added. The doubling is not mere emphasis. It is a sequence. 2 stages of expansion named one after the other. The first adding is the nation itself, the ingathering of the scattered, the demographic restoration, the return from every continent. The second adding is the land, the extension of the borders. And Isaiah is not speaking in abstractions here, he is speaking in geography. In the context of 1967, this verse moved from prophecy to physical map. What follows is prophetic geography, the reading of Isaiah's text against the events of June 1967, not a political endorsement of any specific policy or territorial position. The 6 days did not restore only the heart of the city. They restored the limbs of the land. Judea and Samaria, the highlands of the biblical heartland, the terrain of the patriarchs, the spine of the land, returned to Jewish sovereignty for the first time since the Assyrian conquests. The Golan Heights, which had been used to rain artillery down on the farming communities of the Galilee for 19 years, secured. The Sinai, Gaza, the full territory from the Jordan to the sea. This is what the extension of the borders looked like in stone, soil, and mountain. Isaiah's word for the honor this brings is nishbadta, and it points to something particular, because the nations that had insisted the 1948 restoration was a temporary political accident, a diplomatic anomaly that would correct itself, were now looking at a map that refused to be explained away. The extension of the borders was the rod of correction to every nation that had concluded the everlasting rock was merely a spiritual metaphor. It proved that the Tzur Olamim is not only a foundation for the soul, it is a physical foundation, and it stretches from the Jordan to the sea. That soul's desire, refined across the centuries of waiting, had not just opened a gate in Jerusalem. It had drawn a map. What brings honor to the name is not the victory itself. It is the world's inability to explain it. Verses 16 and 17.
Lord, in distress they sought you. They poured out a whispered prayer when your discipline was upon them, like a pregnant woman who writhes and cries out in her pangs when she is near to giving birth. So were we, because of you, Lord.
The honest admission. These are among the most psychologically honest lines in all of prophetic literature. Isaiah does not offer a triumphalist account of Jewish history. He names the pain directly: distress, discipline, writhing, labor. Chul, the writhing. The biological reality of contractions that build to crisis point. Each attempt at restoration a contraction, each one real, each one costly. There are two false labors embedded in this chapter's history, and they define precisely why 1967 is different in kind, not just in scale. 615 AD was a borrowed birth, a gift from a Persian king, walls made of foreign soldiers, gone the moment the king changed his mind. 1948 was a body without breath, the state born, the bones assembled, but the heart of the city still divided, still out of reach. But 1967, that was the circuit closing. Verse 18.
We conceived, we writhed in labor, as though we gave birth to wind. Salvations we did not accomplish in the land, and the inhabitants of the land didn't fall.
Stop here, because this verse does something that the triumph of 6 days can cause us to skip over, and Isaiah will not let us skip over it. We gave birth to wind. Salvations we did not accomplish. The inhabitants of the land did not fall. The land, not the world. The specific inhabitants of the specific land, those who surrounded Israel in June 1967, Egypt to the south and west, Jordan to the east, Syria to the north. The nations that had encircled Israel with the explicit stated intention of its destruction. The nations whose armies were massed on every border. The nations that, after 6 days, had lost the war, but had not fallen. Egypt still existed. Jordan still existed. Syria still existed. Defeated, yes. Humiliated, yes. But not dissolved, not removed. The armies that had been broken would regroup. The borders that had been extended would be contested. The war of 1973 would come. The rockets would follow. The intention to erase Israel from the land did not die on the runways of Operation Moked. This is Isaiah's sober corrective to every form of premature closure. The circuit that closed in 1967 was real. The Tal Orot was real. The anthem was real. The map was redrawn. Israel stands inside a restoration that is undeniably real and undeniably incomplete simultaneously. That is not contradiction. That is the chul, the writhing of a birth still in process. The ruach is still blowing. Not failure, not reversal. The breath that precedes the final body. We are not at the end of the chapter. We are inside it. Verse 19.
Your dead shall live, their bodies shall rise. You who dwell in the dust, awake and sing for joy. For your dew is a dew of light, and the earth will give birth to the dead.
Talarot, the dew of light. But before we hear verse 19, we need to hear the verse it is answering. Deuteronomy 30, verse 4.
If your outcasts are at the ends of the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will take you.
2 verses, 2 books, the same miracle from 2 angles. Deuteronomy 30, verse 4 describes the gathering of the soul. Isaiah 26:19 describes the placement of the body, the spiritual ingathering first, then the physical awakening that follows it. The Arizal reads deeper still. The outcasts of Deuteronomy are not merely people in physical exile, they are soul sparks, fragments of the primordial soul of Adam, scattered across the Kelipot, the shells of the material world, through generations of incomplete missions. Deuteronomy 30, verse 4, is the cosmic promise. No spark left behind. From the furthest ends of the heavens, every piece gathered and brought home. And Isaiah 26:19 is what happens when they arrive. Tal, dew, but not ordinary dew. Orot, from ore, the ore of the first day. And God said, "Let there be light," the primordial light, the light that preceded all celestial machinery, the light created before there was anything to illuminate, the light of creation's original intention, before the vessels of the world were formed. The resurrection of verse 19 is not a return to what was. It is a return to the ore of the first morning. In the Kabbalistic tradition, this dew is the dew of resurrection, the same primordial light that animates souls across their cycles of return flows back at the moment of national revival. The Arizal reads the Tal Orot as Chokhmah, divine wisdom, descending from the highest Sephirot, the silent energy that gathers what was scattered and restores what was incomplete. The nation that carried the longing forward across the full span of the exile was preparing the surface on which that dew could land. 1948 was the earth beginning to move, the dust stirring, the dry bones assembling, Ezekiel 37 in real time. The body gathered, the state existed, but the city, the gate, the subject of the anthem was not yet reached. June 7th, 1967. The early morning light over the old city, the dew still on the ancient stones of the western wall, paratroopers moving through gates that had not been accessible to Jewish feet in 19 years, the shofar blown at the wall for the first time in a generation. This was not a military event dressed in theological language. This was Tal Orot, the specific vocabulary Isaiah used 2,700 years earlier, resolved in time. The dew of the first light, the earth giving birth to the dead, the ones who dwelt in the dust, awake and singing. And what did they sing? Jerusalem of Gold, written by Naomi Shemer 3 weeks before the war, performed by Shuli Natan at the Israel Song Festival in May 1967. Composed in a minor key, composed as a lament, because at the time of its writing, Jerusalem was still divided, still inaccessible, still the city of the anthem that had not yet found its subject. 3 weeks later, Israeli paratroopers were singing it at the wall. The Tal Orot does not always announce itself in advance. Verse 20.
Come, my people, enter your chambers, and shut your doors behind you. Hide yourselves for a little while, until the fury has passed by.
Come, my people, enter your chambers. After the Tal Orot, after the anthem at the wall, after the map redrawn and the borders extended and the dead arisen and singing, God's very next instruction is, hide. Not triumphalism, not expansion, hide. To understand why, you need to hear Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Moses, Shirat Ha'azinu, the song God commanded Moses to write as a perpetual testimony against Israel's future. And in that song, God names a recurring historical pattern, the Dor Ikkesh, the twisted generation, not the enemies outside, a faithlessness that arises from within in every era of restoration, when the external victory arrives before the internal formation is complete. Deuteronomy 32:5.
They have acted corruptly toward him. They are not his children because of their blemish, a perverse and twisted generation.
Deuteronomy 32:20. I will hide my face from them, for they are a perverse generation, children in whom there is no faithfulness. Moses is describing a pattern that repeats. Every time the restoration arc advances, every time the gates open and the city returns, the Dor Ikkesh emerges. The generation that does not know how to hold what was given, that mistakes the gift for the achievement. That has the external restoration, but has not built the internal chambers. This is why the instruction of verse 20 follows immediately after the triumph of verse 19. Because the Tal Orot descending does not automatically produce the Yetzer Samuch. The chambers must still be entered. The door must still be shut. The interior work that built the strong city must continue, or the Za'am finds the restoration exposed. The Vilna Gaon teaches that the chambers are the clouds of glory, the spiritual atmosphere created by living inside the covenant. You cannot be touched by the Za'am when you are inside. But if you have left the chambers, if the exterior victory has replaced the interior formation, then the Za'am finds you in the open. The Za'am is not permanent. Isaiah says so explicitly, a little while, rega, a moment, until it passes by. A moment in human terms is decades. A moment in divine terms is something else entirely. From the Tal Orot of June 7, 1967 to October 7, 2023 is 56 years. By any human measure, that is more than half a century. Long enough for 2 generations to be born and raised inside the restored city. Long enough for the miracle of 1967 to begin to feel like a permanent baseline rather than a gift. But for the one who held the circuit open across 1,352 years, 56 years is the Rega, the brief hiding that Isaiah describes. The time between the descent of the Tal Orot and the completion of the Za'am's passing. October 7th does not break the prophetic arc, it confirms it. The Za'am had not yet fully passed. The Rega was not over. The chambers are still the instruction. Enter your chambers. Shut the door. The Rega is passing. Verse 21.
For behold, the Lord is coming out from his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity, and the earth will disclose the blood shed on it, and will no more cover its slain.
There is a name here that this channel will not speak around. October 7th, 2023. The breaking in, the hiding, the blood shed in the very chambers Isaiah describes, in the homes, in the safe rooms, behind the locked doors that could not hold. The bodies in the fields of the kibbutzim, the names of the slain that the earth could not cover, and the world could not ignore. This is not political commentary, it is prophetic accounting, and no living person sees history with prophetic clarity while standing inside it. Isaiah offers language that many hear echoing through these events, though suffering never submits easily to explanation. Isaiah's framework does not promise that the restoration arc proceeds in a straight line. The little apocalypse does not conclude with a neat resolution. It concludes with a disclosure, with the Za'am surfacing what had been hidden, bringing into light the blood that had been covered, insisting that the accounting be completed before the next chapter opens. October 7th was not the end of the story. It was, in the precise language of the text, the Za'am passage within the restoration arc. The fury that must pass through before the Rega becomes the other side of the crossing. And here is where Deuteronomy 32 closes the argument. Moses turns to face the enemies, the ones who believe their own power explains Israel's suffering, and delivers a single line. Deuteronomy 32:31. For their rock is not like our rock, even our enemies themselves judge this. their rock, our rock, the Zur of every empire in verse 13's succession, and the Zur Olamim of verse 4. Same word, different foundations. The enemy's built on a rock that cannot hold across the full span of history. They know it. Even they judge it. When the 6 days are over, when the map is redrawn, when the dead have arisen, they cannot explain it by their own calculation. The rock they were standing on was not like that rock. The Zam has a ceiling. What comes after the ceiling is not a return to normal. What comes after is disclosure. The truth that was hidden rises, the accounting closes, and then God does not return to his place. He keeps moving, because coming out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth is not the final act. It is the opening move. The uncovering of the blood is the trail, and at the end of the trail, coiled in the deep, feeding on every century of covered history, is something that has been waiting for exactly this moment. In our next episode, Isaiah 27, you will see what it means to punish Leviathan. For their rock is not like our rock. The hunt has begun. The word of our God stands forever.